Ladies and gentlemen, this is Terry Thayden, who is the granddaughter of Louise Thayden, the woman that we're honoring here this weekend. And Terry, I have to be honest with you. When I saw Terry, it was scary because she looks like her grandmother. I'm sure that you have a lot of people tell you that. It's a compliment.
Great, I'll take that.
Tell our viewers about the accomplishments of your grandmother and why they're honoring her here this weekend.
Louise's accomplishments are many. She started out in aviation in 1928. She made her first records. She set an altitude record of over 20,000 feet. She set a speed record of 156 miles per hour. And she set a solo endurance record of over 144 hours in the air. And all of these records she did within a couple of months of each other in 1928 and 29. And she's the only woman ever to hold these three records at the same time.
She held all three of them at the same time?
At the same time, before one of them was broken.
And then she did another one in 1929.
A very important one.
We did a program a while back with Bobby Trout.
Oh, yes.
Tell our viewers what happened.
In 1929, a group of about 20 women had a race from Santa Monica to Cleveland, Ohio, and about 14 of them finished, one of which was Bobby Trout, who's a grand lady. And it was called the First Woman's Air Derby, which got dubbed the Powder Puff Derby by Will Rogers. I think it was to joke about Ruth Nichols, who used to always whip out her powder puff every time they landed and powder her nose. But these ladies were not expected to make it across the country. They did. Unfortunately, one woman died along the way, which had people trying to stop the race. But
Marvel Crossan.
But Louise was the one who, in the end, won the race. And it was amazing.
First place.
First place.
She came in first. She won the race.
And it was amazing to know that was the first time that women, were allowed to have their own race. And it started off the Cleveland Air Races that year. And what was so unique about Louise was that she didn't stand there and take all of the honor for herself. She thought that everyone who crossed the line was a winner because that race was so hard and it was so unique. So that was very nice.
Well, that's the truth. Every woman who finished the race really was a winner.
Exactly.
Now, let me choose my words carefully. Your mother and some of the other women gave birth under the grandstand of the Cleveland Air Races to an organization called the 99.
You bet.
Bobby Trout told me that's what happened.
You bet.
They gave birth to the 99.
They gave birth.
Right under the grandstand.
I guess, when you can use that, you use it.
But she went on then, and she did something much bigger later on. She not only beat women. Tell our viewers what happened in 1936.
Well, let me start out by saying the Bendix Trophy races were started in 1931, and they were an all-out speed dash across the continent to promote civil aviation, promote airplanes and pilots, see who could get there the fastest, and you had one day to do this race. Since its inception in 1931, it was an all-male race. In 1936, the barriers were broken and females were allowed to race.
Why was it all-male for 5 years?
That's just the way it was. It's just like after the Air Derby, they didn't have another race until 1931 because of the death. And this was just an all-male race. There were so few female pilots.
I see.
That it just happened to be that.
So that it wasn't specifically discrimination.
Well, it was. Yes, it was,
too?
because Amelia Earhart had tried to race in the race before then, and in fact it was Amelia and Helen Ritchie, I believe, who kept squawking and finally got the banner, got it.
But it was also the fact that there were so few women.
There were so few women. But
so then in 1936?
In 1936, they had a special class for women to race. And there was a $2,500 consolation prize, it was called, for the first woman to cross the line.
Which is $25,000 today.
Right, probably even more than that. And so Louise was called by Olive Ann Beach a little bit earlier, about a few weeks earlier than the Bendix was going to start.
Olive was just recently inducted into the San Diego Aerospace Museum Hall of Fame.
That's very fitting, very fitting. She was a wonderful lady. She did a lot for aviation.
So she called Louise and said,
they're going to open up the Bendix to women. Would you like to be in it? Would you like to fly one of our aircraft? And Louise just was overwhelmed. She couldn't believe that they opened it.
She said, well, let me think about it.
And so They went to Wichita and picked up a stock model Beech Stagger Wing, and it had a special tank put in the back.
A stock model?
Stock, totally stock, nothing souped up about it at all. And
but the men were flying
souped up race planes. You know, Mr. Mulligan was in the race. Mr. Mulligan had won in 1935. There were some great aircraft that year. So Louise got this aircraft. They flew to Floyd Bennett Field in New York, and that was where the beginning of the race started. They had so little time to prepare. They didn't even have a surface-to-air radio. They had hardly any navigation equipment at all, just a compass, and they couldn't communicate with the ground. And her husband, Herb, Louise's husband, Herb von Thayden, had to help plot the route because they were so rushed to get everything done that, you know, Herb, that was the first time I remember reading a passage she wrote that it's the first time she'd ever seen a growth of 2 days' whiskers on her husband because they were just trying to get everything done for that race.
Tell our viewers what happened.
Well, they started out from Floyd Bennett Field about dawn and to cross the country to land at what is now LAX. Then it was Mines Field in Los Angeles. And let me think, along the way, there was terrible weather that year. It was noted for being a terrible, terrible weather year. She was with Blanche Noyes, by the way, who was a friend of hers who came along for the trip. They got up above the clouds and weren't quite sure if they were going the right way or not. And it was interesting that the year before, Louise had been working for the air marking service, where the women would go around and paint large compass roses on prominent locations.
That's what the 99s do now.
Exactly, exactly. And there would be a point that said where the nearest airport was or such. And as they were flying, they looked down, there was a hole in the clouds, and they saw one of their land markings. And they said,
right?
We're on course, and, you know, thank goodness that we had done those
A sign
markings.
From heaven.
You bet, you bet. But so, you know, they knew that their work was out there for a good reason. And they stopped in Wichita for a fuel stop, and there they met Walter Beech along the way. And Walter Beech said, what do you think this is, a potato race? You know, you're going very slow. And Louise said she was running the plane at about 65% power because that was where she felt comfortable. And he said, you open that up. So he wanted her to fly out at 100% power. So when she got back in the air, she said, okay, you know, okay, Walter, I'll fly at 100%. She got back in the air, pulled it back to 65% power. She flew her own race.
My wife does that to me. I tell her what I want to happen, and she says, yeah, okay. And then she does as she pleases.
There's probably a reason for that, right?
So what happened?
They kept flying, and the sun was so bright once they got above the clouds, they had to look behind them to see where they were going. So when they got out to LA, they didn't quite know where the finish line was, and they overflew the finish line for the Bendix, and it was by looking behind them, Blanche said, oh goodness, there's the finish line. So they entered the finish line through the back door. It took them over 14 hours to fly this race, and they had figured that they had lost. They said, there's no way, you know,
well, at only 65% power, of course they lost, right?
Right. So they thought they'd sneak into the field. You know, they went the back way anyway, so they landed, and they were trying to sneak off to the side. And all these people started swarming the airplane, and they said, we think you've just won the Bendix. And they said, you're joking with us, don't do that to us. And in fact, they had won the Bendix.
Not a consolation
bracket, prize. They won.
The prize.
They beat everyone, men, women. They came in first.
So who won the consolation prize? Because she came in first.
She got the women's consolation prize, too.
Well, she got them both.
She got the whole purse, 2 checks.
There is justice,
There is justice. And a funny little note was that Walter Beech was very smug. You know, when he got out to the airport the next day, he was very smug and said, I'm glad you took my advice.
I told you that would work.
Put it up to 100%. And she said, well, sorry, Walter, I only had it at 65% power. He couldn't believe it. And in fact, the engine he had given them, it came out, it had 1,200 hours on the engine already. And she said, I can't believe you gave us a grandfather engine to run this race.
That's halfway home, 1,200 hours.
I tell you.
Yeah. So the event here this weekend is to honor her 60th anniversary?
The 60th.
Of her winning the Bendix. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we want to magnify, emphasize, clarify that she was the first woman to win the Bendix trophy. Would you tell our audience that?
Louise Thayden was the first woman to win the Bendix trophy.
Louise Thayden was the first woman pilot to win the Bendix trophy. This is her granddaughter, Terry. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm proud to know you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for recognizing Louise.
This is Christine St. Ange, and she's the owner and pilot of this airplane in back of us. We've got a lot of story to tell. Let's start out with who you are and where you're from.
Okay, I'm Christine St. Ange. I'm from Wexford, Pennsylvania, which is about 25 miles north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
That's where the Allegheny and the Monongahela come together.
That's right, and become the Ohio River.
And you flew here from there?
Yes, we actually took off out of Zelienople Airport, which is approximately the same distance from Greater Pittsburgh International Airport, and flew to Youngstown Elser Field in Ohio, where the origination of this whole trip took place. We brought the plane in on Sunday evening, and then on Monday morning around 10 o'clock, we were the first plane to depart out of Youngstown Elser, and the terminus for that particular day was Springdale, Arkansas. So we flew a very long day to Springdale, Arkansas.
And the next leg?
The next day, we went to Bentonville, Arkansas for the ceremonies at the Thayden Field in Bentonville. Louise was born and raised in Bentonville, Arkansas. And we just had a special dedication there from the mayor of Bentonville, and also a special reading from the senator of Arkansas. And then from there, we flew to Bartlesville, Oklahoma for a welcoming reception there and spent the night there. The next day, we were pretty much on our own. We originally were supposed to go to Wichita, Kansas for a reception there, but unfortunately the weather didn't cooperate.
So you flew to where for your next leg?
Well, I was going to fly as far as Albuquerque, New Mexico, but unfortunately the weather didn't cooperate once again.
That happens, doesn't it?
Yes, I wound up flying all over the state of Arkansas, it seemed, and maybe even up into Kansas a little bit to try to get to my first fuel stop, and wound up 2.5 hours later landing at my first fuel stop in West Woodwood, Oklahoma. And after I got the fuel, the weather just deteriorated down to practically nothing, and it rained real hard, and it was the end of my flying for the day.
So you had to sit there for the weather to clear?
Yes, we spent the night there, my co-pilot Barbara Cox and myself. And the next morning we said we were going to try to at least get Albuquerque or even Phoenix, or perhaps if we had the opportunity weather-wise, maybe even make it all the way to San Diego.
So did you make it to Albuquerque?
No, we didn't. We got to Tucumcari, New Mexico.
I've been there.
Yes, it's a real nice place. It's small, but it's very nice. And the people there, every place that I've been, everyone's been very nice to me. And got the plane fueled up. I had already filed my flight plan. We were getting ready to leave, and some fella came in an airplane, and he said, the weather's really bad out west. You better check flight service again. So when I did, they said that Albuquerque was getting hit with pretty bad thunderstorms, and I decided then to call it a day. Even though Tucumcari was beautiful, not quite this beautiful, but close enough.
Okay. How long have you been flying?
For 23 years. I started my first...
23 years? Yes. But you're only 21 years old.
Yes, I wish I could say that, but no, I'm not.
You've been flying for 23 years.
Yes.
You'll be eligible for your silver wings pretty soon.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. I'm a member of the Silver Wings.
Are you really?
Yes.
Oh, yes, 2 more years.
Tell us about your airplane. It has special markings, the special paint job.
Well, this airplane is serial number 102-110/110. It is actually 2 aircraft that have been put together. And when I had the airplane down for some restoration work and repair work, Bill Thayden approached me and he said, how would you like to change the color of the airplane? Well,
Bill Thayden is Louise Thayden's son.
That's correct. And I never really thought about it, to tell you the truth. I went, no, I'm not going to do that. And the more we talked, the more I thought about it. So I decided to investigate the color scheme, and I got a hold of a 1936 Sherwin-Williams aircraft refinishing specifications chart.
I have one for Model A Ford.
Do you really?
I have a Model A Ford,
wow.
and there's a special book of paints.
That's correct.
That they made in those years.
And anyway, we started looking over the colors, my husband and I did, and we decided that the lighter, or the one color, the horizon blue, looked close enough to what we thought was Louise Thayden's color, and then the darker blue would have been the nice trim job. So it's not exactly the way Louise had on her airplane, but it's close enough.
You get a K for close.
Yeah, K for close.
Yeah.
As you see on the front of the cowling here, Louise had white around her cowling. She had a different engine than I did. I have a smaller Jacobs engine. She had the Curtiss-Wright Whirlwind.
But it's as close as you can get it. It's a replica of what she flew.
Well, not...
Excuse me,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, well, not exactly. It is a C model. Hers was serial number 77. Mine was number 102 that came off the assembly line. So it's close enough.
We won't nitpick.
Nah, no.
Let's call in your co-pilot.
Hi, Captain Fred.
Hi.
How are you doing?
This is Barbara Koff, the co-pilot. Quickly tell our audience about your trip out here. You were in the same plane with her, right?
Yes, I'm Chris's co-pilot, help her navigate and encouragement along the way. And this is just starting my 5th year in the field of aviation. I'm a private pilot and soon to start my instrument training.
And you're both 99s, right?
Both members of 99s. Yeah.
Okay.
And Chris and I started flying together, and we make a pretty good team. And it just goes to prove that when 2 women work together, great things are done.
Also, it's ironic, it's sort of a parallel. Louise Thayden was also in Civil Air Patrol, and she was a lieutenant colonel, and that's what I'm about to be, a lieutenant colonel.
You're in the Civil Air Patrol,
yes, and have
too.
been for 16 years.
How wonderful.
I'm also a flight instructor and instrument instructor and multi-engine instructor. So.
And she sings and dances and whistles and plays the harmonica all at the same time.
Just about.
Okay, let's go ahead and look at the rest of the people here at the Stagger Wing Convention. About 2 weeks ago, I got a phone call from my insurance agent, Pat Webb. She's been my insurance agent for around 10, 12 years. She insures our airplane. And she said, Fred, I don't know if you were aware of who my mother was. And I thought, why should I know who your mother was, you know? She says, my mother was Louise Thayden. Well, of course, when she got married, she changed her name to Webb, which is an argument for women not to change their names when they get married. Anyway, Pat has been my insurance agent for all these years, and I didn't know that she was Louise Thayden's daughter. So we're glad to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you, Fred.
And we'd like to concentrate your interview on the postage stamp. Would you tell our viewers about the postage stamp? Now, the post office made a postage stamp for Bessie Coleman, and they made a postage stamp for Jackie Cochran. Why haven't they made a postage stamp for Louise Thayden?
Well, we think it's about time that they do that, particularly after they actually had a slight error saying that Jackie Cochran was the first woman to win the Bendix in '38, and we said no, it was Louise Thayden in 1936.
Now, that could be an honest mistake.
Oh, yes.
Which they could correct and make feel better by honoring her with a postage stamp. Just quickly,
we think so.
You gave me a resume of your mother's accomplishments.
Yeah.
It was 2 pages. Just quickly, could you tell the viewers some of the things that she accomplished? It wasn't just winning the Bendix.
Oh, no, it was far from that. She was actually the first woman to ever hold the altitude, speed, and endurance records at the same time. And then she went on from that to win the first all-women's air derby in 1929. And from thence went on to set several other records that aren't probably as well known or as important. And then won the previously all-male dominated Bendix Trophy in 1936.
What is the procedure to be on a postage stamp? Is it how many of your friends write in, or the contributions you've made to society, or are there any rules or regulations?
Well, I think basically the criteria is how important was this person to the history of the United States, and as far as her place in history, of course, we feel like she had quite a great one.
Amen.
In the development of infant aviation and in women's right to participate.
Women aviation.
Yes, women in aviation and their right to participate in aviation's growing period. And so, of course, we feel like she should also have a stamp if the other lady pilots have. And I think you could probably do that by writing in to the United States Postmaster, Washington, D.C., and just voice your opinion that, yes, you think Louise Thayden deserves a stamp too, and I'm sure they'll get it to the right place. And I wish we knew whether there were volumes of it or just the fact that she really deserves one. But we know it's the second part, that yes, she deserves one, and volumes certainly might help.
It won't hurt.
It won't hurt.
Okay. If you agree with us that Louise Thayden is deserving of having a postage stamp in her honor, you might want to write to the United States Postmaster, Washington, D.C., and say so.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
My insurance agent, Louise Thayden's daughter.